Welcome to Tennessee This Week. Good to be with you. Our panel of pundits, George Korda, our political analyst, back from wherever he's been hanging out. Craig Griffith, our healthcare analyst, is here as well. Hey, guys, for like 3 weeks, minus the week we weren't on the air, we've been talking about the Speaker of the House thing because it's been ongoing and going and going and going. We finally have a new speaker. Representative Tim Burchett says it was worth ousting Kevin McCarthy and all the chaos to get Congressman Mike Johnson. Representative Chuck Fleischmann also supports him. Representative Diana Harshberger said Speaker Johnson will work tirelessly to unite the conference and hold the Biden administration accountable and address the many challenges facing our nation. So, questions. Who's Mike Johnson and how do you see him leading the GOP? We'll start with George.
Well, the other night, or last Friday night, I was in the stands at a football game, and a very kind gentleman I didn't know leaned over and said, "Tell me, what do you think is going to happen with this speaker's race?" And I asked him, "Did you recognize me from TV or radio?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, here's what I think is going to happen. I think that they're going to have to find a compromise candidate, and it'll probably be someone none of us have ever heard of. And here's Mike Johnson. And very few people outside of Louisiana have probably ever heard of this fella."
Right.
And so that means he's a compromise candidate. Who knows what kinds of agreements he had to reach in order to become speaker, but it could also be that he didn't have to do much of anything because Republicans reached a point where they realized we've got to do something and we can't agree on this guy. And I think that the Republicans realized post-McCarthy that they'd reached a point where, okay, most people really don't care about inside baseball stuff in Washington.
Right.
But it was starting to look and sound as if there was, just absolute dysfunction within the party. And they were able to put it together. And now we will find out what kind of speaker. I mean, he's only been in the House for 6-7 years. So he doesn't have a wealth of experience, and maybe that's good. We have people complaining all the time that you got these longtime politicians in places of power. Well, this is not a longtime politician, and he's in a place of power. And let's see what he can do with it.
Greg, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I don't know how many backroom deals that he had to make to get this, but unfortunately for him, he lives under the backroom deals that Kevin McCarthy made with the members of the Republican members of the House. He still can be called to an election with by a call by one representative. So he has these same constraints that McCarthy had, and I don't know how well he's going to live under those as McCarthy had the problems as well.
You think you think that'll happen again? You think that could actually happen again, considering the look that they had, that they would do that again?
Well, it depends. Well, what are the contours of the budget agreement that's coming up on November 17th?
Right.
Everyone points to the fact that the deal that McCarthy made was the beginning of the end for him. So what kind of deal is Johnson going to make to keep the government open? Or is he one of the people, the minority in the representatives in the House that think the government needs to shut down for a while? So we'll have to see what kind of deal he strikes. There's already talk of a bill to get them into next year, continuing resolution. And will the conservative members of his caucus agree to that? They didn't agree to it under McCarthy. So we'll have to see if actually has anything changed. He did not assume the speakership with any sort of plan to address any of the issues that they're concerned about. He didn't come up with a plan to resolve the budget impasse. He didn't have a plan that he advocated for, border security. And where does he stand on Israel and Ukraine? So these are things we don't know. And when his positions become more public, maybe things won't be quite so rosy.
You say those things, but obviously we don't know. But I mean, if you got Matt Gaetz who didn't vote against the person again, he must have said that he at least is going to support that, what it was, a group of 8 or whatever. And even I think Tim Burchett might be in part of that as well. And I'm just looking at this whole thing as the process of this whole thing, saying, were they just sick of it? Or did they actually just say, hey, this is how it should be. I mean, Washington, D.C., and you both know this, we send people there and then they go there again and again and again, and they spend years and years, and you get people there for 20 plus years. And some say, yeah, this was a joke, this was chaos. Other people say, hey, why do we need to make it easy on the people who are in Washington, D.C.? Maybe this is what they do need. They need to have it shaken up. They need things not to work out. It shouldn't be easy, shouldn't be the same old way.
Well,
was this good or bad?
Well, the politics fundamental is the art of compromise, and nobody gets everything they want all the time. That's the way it's designed. That's the way our system is designed. And this idea that and what happens is people run for Congress saying, I'm going to go to Washington and represent you. I only care about you.
Right.
But then the way the system works, they get there and they automatically go to work for the party. And there's got to be total unity, and everybody's got to agree with everybody all the time. And you can't embarrass the president if he's of your party. You can't embarrass the speaker if he's all that stuff. And the reality is that while we're arguing as a country about what we're going to do with respect to the government maybe shutting down, the reality is, I think the last time I checked it, we are borrowing. The nation, our government is borrowing in our names. I think I'm right on this, because it's going to be about a $2 trillion deficit this year. I think it's $250 billion an hour. Every hour of every day. Someone could check my math on that, but I think I'm pretty close, if not low. And so we can keep talking about, oh, Lord, you mean the government isn't going to pay its bills? We can't afford this. We don't have the money. And whenever someone tries in Congress to say, we don't have the money, they're saying, oh, you want to starve children, and you want old people to die, and you want to cut Medicare and Social Security. When it gets to the point where the government looks at us and says, we don't have the money to pay for these things anymore, then you're going to hear weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. So some members of Congress, and I don't know if I fully agree with them, but some members of Congress are using this as the only wedge they can to talk about the borrowing that's going on by our government.
Right.
And as soon as they do, and I'm not saying I agree with all of them on all of their points, but as soon as they do, it becomes you are trying to destroy the country. The argument is, what's going to destroy the country in the long run? Talking about or trying to force something related to the debt and the deficit, or letting it go on unabated?
Well, I'd heard someone say
the thing is that, you cannot address the debt, the deficit, without addressing 3 or 4 fundamental issues. One of them is Social Security.
Right.
The second one is Medicare and Medicaid, TriStar, and then the Defense Department. And if you don't come up with a plan to address the spending in those particular areas, instead of all this nonsense about let's do away with the education department, which accounts probably for 0.02% of the budget. But until you come up with a plan that addresses those that are the main drivers of the federal budget, the federal deficit, and the federal debt, and if you don't come up with solutions to those problems, then you are not doing anything.
Congress can't touch 3/4 of the federal budget.
Right.
It is automatic increase and untouchable. So until you deal with that, you cannot deal with the deficit and the debt.
Yeah, granted, it adds to the problem when you send other countries. I mean, you're sending other countries money. I'd heard someone say, glad he's there. His first thing he should do is reject Biden's giving millions or billions of dollars to Ukraine and Israel. Do you see that this group and him leading this group to say, hey, enough is enough. We're not going to give money, considering what's going on in Israel right now and what continues to go on in Ukraine? Will that funding for those places stop as a way to say, hey, we have to reduce our spending?
Well, you can do that and make political hay with particular groups, but you still aren't addressing the problem. You still aren't addressing those drivers of the federal budget, the 3/4 that George mentioned that You know, they haven't come up to a solution that continue growth in those programs and what you're
Right.
going to do on the long term to make them financially stable. And if you need, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm sending it,
Right.
saying this, more revenue. You know,
no one wants to touch the third rail. That's, I mean, if you want to get reelected, you don't want to touch the third rail.
And maybe we need some people that don't want to get reelected.
Yeah, that's probably true. Hey, with that, we're going to take a break. That's our first subject, and we'll talk about some other things when we come back on Tennessee This Week. Welcome back to Tennessee This Week. We're now talking about American Medical Response, or AMR. That's the ambulance service that's been in the Knox County area since 2013, getting a renewal contract. It is not officially done. We need to say that right now. I think that they have until the end of the year, the county commissioners, to sign off on that, but it looks like it's headed that way. I'm just curious, is this a good deal for Knox County? Is it, that's all that's out there for Knox County? I mean, they've definitely had some issues in the past, but they're going to go ahead and sign a contract. I think it's 5 years with another 5-year extension possible as well. Craig, you're the health expert here.
Well, the ambulance services and hospitals and the county have all gotten stuck in between the problems post-pandemic. The staffing shortages at hospitals, at the ambulance services, have caused response times to increase quite a bit. So the county was right, I think, in bidding out the contract early and hiring a consultant to guide them through this process. And I've read their methodology, and they seem to have done a thorough job in identifying the problem. And, you know, they came up with a solution that everyone else likes too. We'll have to throw more money at it. So the contract is going to cost the taxpayers more. But I think it's a service that if you went out and polled, you know, people and asked them, is this a critical service that you would pay for? The answer probably would be yes. So the contract will be renewed, but a lot of the issues that they're facing are beyond the control of county government. So it'll be interesting to see if they can stay in the parameters of the contract or have to get amendments like they have over the past several years to address the situation as it's unfolding, both at hospital emergency rooms and the increase in number of calls for service. So the county had to do something, and I think that on paper, the contract seems to be one that will help us meet the needs of getting a shorter response time in the more rural areas of the county, where it can be up to 20, 25, 30 minutes. Right. And of course, everyone wants to be in the golden 4 minutes of a heart attack. So something had to be done. The county took the initiative, and let's hope that in the end, this will alleviate some of the problems.
Yeah, the study versus maybe starting from scratch. Is this the right play, George?
Well, the interesting thing to me is that with all of these issues related to AMR's response times, calls for service, the amount of time it takes, the average amount of time, et cetera, that their contract's going to be renewed for AMR. What that indicates is that the people who make the decisions on county government realize this isn't their fault. This is not on them.
Right.
Otherwise, what happens in a political environment like this is if they think there's a better alternative of any kind, politicians will tend to attack the one with the contract, because obviously whoever doesn't have the contract is going to be better than whoever is the incumbent at the moment. So the fact that this isn't happening and the renewal has been taken place suggests that the people who make the decisions realize there is no benefit politically or operationally to condemning, criticizing, or just beating up on AMR. And whether the new contract and its new provisions will solve the problem, we're going to find out about that down the road. But it was interesting to me, the lack of discussion about, we don't like those guys, because had there been any sentiment along those lines, it would have been voiced. as a political statement to attract attention, if nothing else. But it really didn't happen.
I know that. I know AMR.
Don, I think you were talking about, starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And what I assume you meant by that was hiring EMTs and buying ambulances and starting up a whole new county department of ambulance service. And that was going to be prohibitively expensive.
Right.
Yet another bureaucracy. I think, George, when we first started at the city had a couple of ambulances, and I think it took no time before they got out of that business.
Yeah.
And used the county service or contracted with the county. So hiring and starting a whole new department in this current atmosphere of where are you going to hire the employees from, where are you going to get them? You had to buy the ambulances, which are probably $300,000 or $400,000 each. You'd have to staff up a whole new department. No one wanted to see that happen.
But you're going to get the same people. You're going to get this. They're going to come over from AMR if you do that, I guess, right?
Right, but you're increasing the FTEs in the county, and oh my goodness, no one wants to increase FTEs, full-time employees. You don't want that to happen. So I think that it's a non-starter to think that you're going to come up with your own ambulance service at this point in time.
Well, nobody might want that except whoever it is who might have been in charge of that, because the government is an organism. You have to think of it as an organism. And organisms have two functions: survival and reproduction. Survival, staying alive, keeping the job, and reproduction means increasing your authority, power, whatever. And so there are probably people inside the government who would have liked to have seen this because it would have accrued to their survival and reproduction. But it's not. It's not a... If you've got a private vendor who's doing it and you can give them less money than it would take to do it yourself, because when you do it yourself, you've also got to take all the blame if something goes south. So it's understandable that somebody might have liked it, but that it didn't have a lot of legs.
Yeah, some people say that they just need to do a better job vetting calls. People call the ambulance and I don't have a percent, but I'm sure several. I once hung out with a fire station for 24 straight hours. They went on 12 calls. Every one of them was an emergency medical call. And of those emergency medical calls, this is just my opinion, probably 3 of them needed the fire department and ambulance to be there. And the other ones, they didn't. But again, that's a whole different thing, vetting the calls so that they're more available. Instead of running out.
The consultant talked about that.
Yeah.
Triage the calls as they come in.
Right.
So that's another step down the road. And and if you make a mistake in that, then like George says, is the buck's going to stop there, and no one wants the buck to stop at their desk.
Oh, exactly. All right, guys, we're going to take another quick break. Be back with one more segment here on Tennessee This Week. Welcome back to Tennessee This Week. Time to talk a little politics again here, this time in the state of Tennessee. The Beacon poll came out with some October results. Despite all the national attention, despite being in the Tennessee 3, Gloria Johnson is down 20 points to Marsha Blackburn, 49 to 29 among likely voters. And again, everyone who does their polls, they can lean certain ways and ask certain ways. We all know how that works, but at least you want them to be talking to likely voters. First off, are you surprised of that gap at this particular time, or not surprised?
No, I mean, if the election were held today, if the election were held next month, when the election's held next year, if Gloria Johnson is the Democratic nominee, it's going to be 65, 35, 70, 30, if that, for Blackburn. Gloria Johnson has absolutely, positively no chance whatsoever. And I think Marsha Blackburn made a mistake when Gloria Johnson announced, because there was about a paragraph, a long paragraph response to Johnson's announcement. And all she should have said was, she's got a primary to face. And clearly she's not even leading that primary, not even close to leading that primary. Yeah. So I don't think Marsha Blackburn is going upstairs to bed at night thinking, oh no, what am I going to do about Gloria Johnson? And it just not happening.
And to that point, The same poll shows that 2020 Democratic candidate, Senate candidate, Marquita Bradshaw, currently is trailing by 12 points to Blackburn, 48-36 among likely voters. So, is Gloria going to be the candidate?
Well, that remains to be seen. Bradshaw was active in the primary against Phil Bredesen 2 years ago or 4 years ago, whatever that election was. So she has much better name recognition across the state, and she's much stronger in the Memphis area because she's from Memphis than Gloria is. And while there was some, spotlight shed on her as being one of the Tennessee Three, she was not, the biggest star of that show. So I think the primary is going to be a difficult battle for the Democrats. And the results of it, whoever runs against Marsha, well, the only interesting thing that I will see is if whoever is that candidate increases their share of the vote over what Phil Bredesen got. And if that's the case, then there may be some movement in those issues that the Democratic candidates will espouse concerning abortion and gun control, to see where the state is. So that's about the only interesting thing I think that will come out of the senatorial election next year.
One of the most significant problems that the Democratic Senate candidate has, apart from the fact this has transitioned over the last 30 years from a predominantly Democratic to a substantially Republican state, is that Joe Biden appears to be going to lead the ticket for the Democrats. And you're not going to excite Tennessee voters, by and large, to say, I'm going to go vote for this candidate, regardless of who it is, because they're going to line up with Joe Biden. That is a weight that is either tied around your ankle while you're trying to swim across the lake, or you're trying to run a race. You can't do it. And there's an awful lot of sentiment within the Democratic Party for Joe Biden not to do this. And I think from all appearances,
so should they be spending? Should they be spending money? Sorry to interrupt, but should Democrats spend money thinking that someone like Gloria could, or even Bradshaw could win here? Because other thing I want to throw in here, that same survey, 23% of Tennessee voters are still undecided. So that could swing, if 20% of them went to one or the other, it could change how it is right now.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen. You're not going to have 20% of 23% undecided go to a one candidate or the other. If you split it down the middle, it doesn't matter how you concoct it. Anybody, Republicans are in the driver's seat. And the reality is that the guy at the top of the ticket is going to have a major impact on the enthusiasm, the willingness, the interest with respect to people getting out to vote. And if Biden is the candidate, that is going to be a drag on an already unlikely to win Democratic Senate candidate, whoever it is.
So the same thing can be.
Well, I would say also that whoever the Republican candidate for president is could well be a drag on the party too. Right. Not necessarily in the lower offices, but there is a possibility that, as in the last presidential election, whoever that person is may wind up losing substantially to Biden. So, you'll have to, that serves both parties as well.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. What now?
Well, I mean, I guess if Trump, let's just say it's Trump and Biden, Trump has got his positives and negatives too. We just saw a couple elections in Nashville where some people who were aligned with President Trump lost, I think, in those cases. But to this question, when we only have 30 seconds left, should Democrats focus spending money elsewhere?
They're going to focus spending money elsewhere.
Yeah, they won't put much money into this.
Yeah.
And you won't see many Democratic national candidates coming to Tennessee to campaign for Democratic Senate candidates because they're not going to spend a lot of time and money on what is in all probability a losing cause.
All right. That's going to be the last word because we're down to just a few seconds. We want to thank Craig. We want to thank George for wherever he's been coming back to join us again.
Glad to be here.
And thank you for watching Tennessee This Week. We'll see you next week.
The views of guests on Tennessee This Week are their own and do not represent the views of WATE 6 of your side or Next Star Broadcasting.